Crystalline Podcast. Crystalline Podcast.
Conversations to inspire.
Hello and welcome to the Crystalline Podcast. Inspirational conversations with extraordinary folk. This week we sat down with none other than Tim Sullivan. Enjoy.
So, welcome ladies and gentlemen. Today I am thrilled to welcome my friend Tim Sullivan to the show. Tim is a seasoned practitioner and teacher of classical Chinese medicine, drawing from a rich background of therapies to support healing. With decades of experience, he brings a compassionate and unique approach to wellness, helping clients reconnect to their bodies and vitality. Tim's work is rooted in deep tradition, yet always responsive to the individual. So without further ado, Tim, my man, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you for the kind introduction.
No problem, no problem. How's sunny old England treating you?
It's treating me very well, as you know. Devon is heaven, with sunny blue skies.
That's good to hear. So for the people that don't know who you are, can you give us a little bit about your journey and who you are?
Okay, well, I practice classical Chinese medicine, as you said. I got into kind of medicine in a very weird way. So I kind of studied a lot of different forms of therapy to start with. It took me a while to kind of get together and get started. But I came across Brazilian psychic surgeons and sort of various different Taoist and sort of Buddhist practitioners, and eventually realized that I needed something a bit more kind of grounded. So I came across acupuncture, and from there I was incredibly frustrated because it seems like no one could really answer the questions I was interested in. Like, why do we get ill? Who are we? If we change our minds, how do we change the world and things like this? And it wasn't until I came across a recording of my teacher in the library that I came across someone who could actually answer the questions I was interested in. And I've been studying with him for the last 20 plus years.
So what is, to the people that aren't aware, what many people have heard of acupuncture, but what actually is Tuina?
Okay, well, there are 4 pillars of Chinese medicine. So you have the whole diagnostic system, and you can apply healing modalities through 4 main areas. They're going to be Chinese herbs, they're going to be Qigong, which is kind of used to be called Daoyan, which is kind of like exercises similar to Tai Chi. And then you've got acupuncture, and then you've got Tuina. So Tuina is where a lot of the kind of needle techniques of acupuncture come from. It's a manual work that you do on the body. So it's a cross between acupuncture and Qigong. So if you can't move your own Qi and blood by doing Qigong, then you pay someone to move it for you with Tuina. So we kind of look at, it usually takes, classically they say 10 years is always the time it takes to master something. But generally speaking, you first learn Tuina by moving Qi and blood through area routines. Like you might move Qi and blood through the back, through a leg, so it's very good for kind of obstructions to the external anatomy of the body. And then you'll learn how to move Qi and blood through acupuncture points, so acupressure. This is where acupressure names come from. So you'll stimulate acupressure points to have a particular effect on the body. And then what you'll do is you'll start learning holographic techniques. So the idea is that you can treat the whole body just by working on the hand or the foot or the ear. And this is where things like reflexology come from. And lastly, you can move Qi and blood not even touching the body, even over great distances. And this is where kind of healing Qigong sort of comes from. So where you can move your Qi and you visualize the Qi in the patient and you engage. So you got everything from spinal manipulation all the way through to hands-off healing and distance healing. So it's a very versatile system, and that would be kind of an overview of Tuina.
Okay, so what's your thoughts on it over as a superior form to over acupuncture then? Because I've seen that you're trained in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, acupuncture is and Tuina are very similar. They have a lot of overlap, so we would say that acupuncture has an advantage over Tuina in the fact that you can tell a story better. You can engage with the narrative of the acupuncture points to create the story of the healing and the story of the so it's like you can stimulate more than 3 points at a time. With
Mm.
Tweenar, unless you got one hand with one way, one hand another way, and a foot maybe or somewhere else, you can't really stimulate multiple points at the same time to have an overall effect being stimulated at the same time. The advantage that Tweenar has over acupuncture is that you can move the chi and the blood much more effectively. So if there's an obstruction and if there's something you're trying to clear, Tweenite has an advantage that acupuncture doesn't. You have to train very long time and cultivate very well in order to make the needles perform as efficiently in moving chi and blood with Tweenite as you do with acupuncture. So there's more subtlety of acupuncture and control. But I find that Tweenar has much more connection of touch, so there's much more relational, and patients are much more able to open up with quality of touch, and that I find much more able to connect with patients, the more their true self, and able to then relax into their true self. But that's more of my personal preferences. Acupuncture. I found acupuncture a little bit difficult because I was a little bit separated away. You put the needles in and then you leave the patient, and I didn't quite like that so much. So it was more a personal choice to leave acupuncture behind and come into more Tweenar as I progressed. But that may change.
Okay. And another sort of pressing question I had, what would you say is the difference between TCM, because most people heard of traditional Chinese medicine, and then not many
Yeah.
people are familiar with the phrase classical Chinese medicine. What would you say is the main difference between
So
them?
it's just different approaches. So TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, was created by the Communist Party after Nixon came to China, and there were acupuncture had gone through a bit of a bad spell. So in kind of like the 11th, 12th century, I think there was the Imperial Academy, which was kind of like the the main governing body at the time, which was related to the emperor. They were used training doctors, and the population of China was very big, so the training program became more and more difficult. So you had 9 needles, you had 6 different meridian systems, you had a whole load of stuff, and of course back then there wasn't sort of hygiene, and there was some of the needles were almost like doing surgery on people. So they decided it was too dangerous, and they cut it out and they made it smaller. And anyone who disagreed with that would be exiled south to die from malaria. So if you disagreed with the way that they got rid of the 6 meridian systems, and they went down for, instead of the sinew channels, the low vessels, the divergent channels, the subcutaneous channels. The eight extraordinary vessels hadn't been invented yet, but the primary channels were the ones that we all know today, and they were the ones that were then taught to the Imperial Academy clinicians, which was the gold standard. And if you disagreed, you went south, so to Vietnam and places like this, or sort of where those traditions still remain. So if you go to those countries, they have a tradition where they have a much more complex attitude towards acupuncture. And instead of having the 9 needles, they went down to 1 needle. And so acupuncture became kind of lesser at that time, and it was considered to be good for pain and things like this. But if you wanted real medicine, you'd go to a herbalist. And then in the 18th century, they got rid of acupuncture completely from the Imperial Academy. But there were thousands and thousands of itinerant doctors or people who had family lineages who were still using acupuncture and or many different ways. And when the communists came to power, I think that they wanted to standardize it. So they got so the herbalists of the time and the Communist Party got together, and they created something called traditional Chinese medicine. And that was then because there was a lot of interest from the West and people wanted to learn, they created a syllabus to learn, and that was what became TCM. That became traditional Chinese medicine. There was also, in England, you had I think Van Buren and Worsley were 2 practitioners who So they studied from a practitioner in Korea, and they studied what they call stems and branches and five elements acupuncture. That's more constitutional style acupuncture. It's to help people understand the nature of their life and make changes so that destiny unfolds better, or their DNA they can change inherited conditions and things like this. And they became kind of like the two main schools in England. So you had the Worsley tradition, which were in Leamington Spa, and you had the, I think it was Van Buren was Stems and Branches in East Grinstead. And they also became kind of, East Grinstead was less, Stems and Branches more astrological based. So you look at someone's birth chart, and then you can look at the date today, and then you find an acupuncture point that's relevant, and you need all that, and that would be how you'd engage with that style. It's a summary, so it's a little bit simplified. Five elemental acupuncture was where you look at there's an intrinsic nature that someone has, their temperament, and you try to assess their temperament, and you try and help that temperament manifest. And they would say that most causes of disease was because they were not able to manifest that temperament, and so you could then treat all manner of diseases by harmonizing someone and helping them come back into their nature. And then there's all these other sort of ways that people work with. So the Japanese style acupuncture, which is where people think five elemental acupuncture came from, where when the Mongols invaded China, they went to invade Japan, and Japan closed off and isolated, so they no longer were able to have the technology and advances in acupuncture and Chinese medicine from China. So they refined the five elemental approach, and they became very interested in five. So shiatsu is tuinar, but it's based on massage, based on five elemental approach. So, and they didn't get the understanding of fluid pathology, which came along sort of after that happened. So there's lots of ideas, and really Chinese medicine is really an applied philosophy. So if you can understand the philosophy, you can then play and explore the healings of the methods of modalities of the modalities of healing with those things. So there are kind of four main kind of philosophical medicines in Chinese medicine. So we could say that if someone comes in, what you could do is you could say the condition is penetrated into the body and they can't release it. And so we'd say if we can release the condition, then the patient can heal. And so that became the school of attacking and purging, which is its own speciality as well. And they would say that, as long as the routes of elimination were free, there was enough fluid to facilitate catharsis, and there was enough yang to be able to motivate catharsis, then no disease could linger in the body. And then you had the school of adaptation, where they would say the disease has happened where you were fighting and you were pushing, but it became too much for you, and now you're storing. And so what we're doing is we're looking at all the ways you're storing pathology, and this is where a lot of the psychological ideas of pathology come in. So you'd look at how the person locks that pathology in their body, and the way they'd lock it in their body would be they're locking the diaphragm, so they hold their breath often. So if you look at trauma release therapy and things like this, it's all based on breathing exercises and anything that releases the locks on the body that holds it in. So we would say that there's chi stagnation, which would be body armoring. So you're bracing to try and resist reality or trying to control reality. And then you're sort of locked in a story that you can't let go of. So you have this story of an idea or something that can't, and that's what we call blood stagnation. So we have strategies for mobilizing and moving all those to then start resolving and digesting trauma or things that are held in the body. And then the third area would be harmonization. We would say, well, what the real problem is the person has lost sight of their true nature. And if we can just resonate with them and help them remember their true nature, then that will be the resolution to their disease, and change can take place then. And so in that case, the usual causes of the inability to harmonize would be if there's too much heat in the system, which would be kind of someone who's quite neurotic, or someone who's quite addicted to something, who's obsessive, someone who's got inflammatory markers in their system. So there's kind of a muscle wasting, atrophy, these kinds of things. It would be heat would be created. Heat is a classification of disease in Chinese medicine. The other one would be damp. If there's too much damp, then there's more of a disassociation in people. They kind of numb out, they get depressed, they become kind of disassociated and isolated, and they don't really want to engage with life. And that would be, they tend to accumulate weight, and they tend to have more of a couch potato lifestyle, a low energy, and things like this. And then you'd need to have some degree of resources in your life, some degree of yin. And if you didn't, you can't really manifest yourself and your destiny. And that would be how we'd then work with a strategy to approach how to harmonize people. And then the last one would be tonification. Your income is worse than your expenditure, and you're getting ill because you don't have enough resources in your day-to-day life, and you keep on having to use your life savings. So those would be the 4 strategies that we tend to look at, which we can then subdivide into many other subtle forms of strategy of how we'd approach healing in any of the 4 main modalities of Chinese medicine, whether herbs, qigong, tuina, or acupuncture.
And you use all 4 of those when needed?
Yeah, well, you have to really. I mean, what you're looking at is the story. You're looking at how did the person get ill in the first place? What's the cause of this illness? Where is it now, and where is it threatening to go? And so that would be the building blocks of looking at how you would then make a structure of a treatment. So, with the story of the disease is very important. So is it coming from the outside? Is it coming from an inability for you to navigate your terrain with your body with the exterior anatomy or the exterior of the climate? So climate is a thing that can cause disease. Poisons and toxins can cause disease. Inappropriate climatic things, so too much sun, not enough sun, too much damp climate, these are the kind of things that you kind of how you adapt and navigate the body, and you want to kind of help the body mediate those kinds of things in the system. Then you've got kind of the mid-level effects of the disease created by inappropriate mental, emotional aspects. So someone who has too much internal emotion, so they have too much frustration. They want something, they don't know how to get it. And as a consequence, it just churns them up. It will then create this ascendancy in their chi. So suddenly they'll get sort of a red face, they'll get red eyes, they'll get headaches, migraines, so we can kind of understand the physiological mechanisms of diseases based on the mental, emotional engines that are generated in their system that they can't find a resolution to. So we want to help them find a resolution to that. It could be through diets, that their disease is coming from inappropriate diets. They keep on having greasy fried foods with a lot of chili, or they have a lot of alcohol in their diet, or drugs. These are going to be the kind of things that would then be the engines of the disease that you can mitigate by regulating their body in some way. But ultimately, until they make changes in their life, until they can realize that the diet and lifestyle they have is creating their disease, and it's a medicine. Everything has a medicine. So if you have cigarettes every day, you'll get cigarette medicine. If you have chocolate every day, you'll get chocolate medicine. If you have broccoli every day, you'll get broccoli medicine. So these are the things. So we start looking at the main cause of disease in Chinese medicine would be a cause of this. I don't want to say the main. Chinese medicines are a vast thing, but change would be what we would describe as healing. So if you can change, you can heal. The last cause of disease, of course, would be kind of inherited condition, which we could look at medically as DNA, inherited from your parents and things like this. Or if you want to get esoteric, we can look at kind of like your destiny, how it unfolds, and more kind of spiritual approach to things.
Okay, interesting. So it really is like a holistic approach.
I would say it's the kind of the original holistic approach. I mean, it's like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, they both influence each other a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the 3 elements in terms of Ayurvedic traditions, you've got the 5 elements in terms of the Chinese approach, which is a way of looking at constitutional therapy, like the DNA type, destiny type, spiritual type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But, you've also got the Greeks' 4 elements. So our original medicine system based on the 4 elements. And there's a lot of arguments that China and India were influenced by the Greeks, and that the elemental understandings come from Greek philosophy and medicine. But that's an argument I don't really know much about, but it's an interesting idea.
So I know tween is like a hands-on. It would look like to most people like a form of massage, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say? Because I remember when we've had sessions, you're asking questions, and then through the sort of response and processing of the language, the areas that are being worked on loosen up. So how much of what people experience physically is a emotional or psychogenic component?
Well, we kind of look at these, we talk about qi in Chinese medicine, which is really basically a way of describing relationship. So the highest, the most crude form of qi would be the external anatomy, how you move your body and how you perceive. So that's what we call the wei qi, the defensive qi of the body. The kind of mid-level, which is kind of another way of describing blood, but we could describe that as yin qi or nutritive qi, is like how you nourish yourself and how much capacity you have for consciousness. So how if you have a reserve of blood, then you can be quite relaxed around even volatile situations because you've got a lot of capacity. But as the blood becomes stagnant and stuck, as you become rigid, your ideas become rigid and your emotions become rigid. So often what happens is when I'm working with the physical tightness of the body. So I'm promoting relaxation. And I'm doing that by bringing awareness to the body and relaxation to the chi, so the muscles and the sinews and things like this in the body. If I'm working on the blood level, I'm working on conscious level, what I'm trying to do is bring relaxation and awareness to thoughts and feelings. And often what happens is people's thoughts and feelings, they get almost possessed with the idea or almost possessed by the feeling. And that becomes their reality. And as a consequence, they get very stuck, and that rigidity becomes the cause of their disease. And I'm sure you meet people who you can't really have a conversation with them, or if you have a conversation with them, they're very predictable. You know the answers they're going to have. They're not even able to listen to what you have to say a lot of the times. I'm sure in families these kinds of blood stagnations happen a lot in long-term relationships. And so our own philosophy and idea about the world, the world is wrong, the world is bad, the world is this. So when we try to when we can get caught up in that, it tends to stagnate the internal mechanisms of the body. So when I work, I'm also asking questions in order to understand where people are stuck in the frameworks they have and how these frameworks are creating the disease that they have in the first place, and trying to give them a way of digesting their experiences, because thoughts and feelings, you can express them, you can suppress them, and you can repress them. These would be the kind of so in the West we kind of say expression is great, and we'd say that people who express are really great and people who suppress are really bad. So women are very good at expressing emotion, men are very bad at they suppress emotion. But both of those are pathological from a Chinese perspective. What we want is we want digestion. We want you to bring awareness and relaxation around these things so that you digest these experiences, and then these engines that generate your disease break apart, and you can be much more relational to the world, to other people, and to yourself, and you open the door to the heart rather than the heart protector. The heart protector will try to create a sense of certainty in life, and as a consequence we get caught up with trying to control everything around us, or if we can't control it, kind of feel we kind of destroy our enthusiasm for life, because if we can't get it, we'd rather destroy what we wanted in the first place. We get depressed and we get kind of resentful and bitter about the world. And so returning back to health would be returning back to a sense of as we were children, where we were open to the experiences we're having. And if you are not trying to control the experience you have, you become playful, you become interested, and you become young at heart. And that would be kind of how I work with patients, is to try and identify where they are rigid and the cause of their disease, where their bitterness and resentment is, and use different perspectives to try and see if they can disidentify with the story they tell themselves and come into a sense of deeper understanding of the heart and letting things go, and they digest and those blockages break, and then they open the door to new experiences in life and healing. And that would be how a way I like to work.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty profound. And I didn't realize, like I did a little bit of research on you, because obviously I only know you from Tweener, but I see here that you studied intuitive massage, shiatsu, tai chi, qigong, reflexology, acupressure, bioenergy healing, and probably missing a tarot. And I was wondering, how much of all those things do you take elements from and put into your classical Chinese Tweener system, or is that such a complete holistic system they're almost not necessary? Because I haven't heard you mention anything from them in our time together?
Well, I mean, Chinese medicine is huge, and it's a system that I mean, it's the most profound thing I've come across, in terms of understanding, and particularly from my teacher. The way it's taught in TCM and things like this is simplified because it's too
Mm,
complicated, but he's trying to strip things down and make things easier. And I can understand why, because do you want to spend 20 years trying to master something? And it's like, if you've got a population of 1.4 billion people, you can't have 20-year studies or 10-year educations into some before people can start to work. And when they work, they're very interested in the nuances of the individual. So the big argument is population medicine. So in the West we have population medicine. We don't really medicate individuals. We medicate population groups. So Chinese medicine really is about understanding the individual, or from me, the classical approach is about understanding the individual. The classics is very interesting. It's they don't tell you what to think. So if you read the classics, there are sort of several texts that I would consider from the antiquity that are the classics that, if you can read in their original language, they give you they don't tell you the answer of what to think. They give you an interesting thing that you have to work out yourself. And in working out yourself, it forces you to change the way you perceive and the way you engage, and it gives you insight.
mm.
And so everyone cultivates their own way, which is a very unique thing. I've studied, all these different systems, and I think all these systems are very interesting. They give you more insights into the way you work. And I've obviously borrowed a lot of different things, but I don't think it's really borrowing. I think it's helped me unlock a lot of the insights into Chinese medicine in very profound ways. So it's enabled me to understand the stories of people, and the why we get stuck in the way we are. So things like tarot, which is understanding the stories of life and the stories of people and the archetypal stories, although it's something I don't really use so much anymore, it's something that really informed me of the ways that narratives play, the role narratives play in the cause of disease, and the roles narrative can play in helping someone find liberation from. So helping someone become the narrator of their own life, is a very beautiful thing. But my teacher comes and brings all these factors into the way he teaches. So I feel very blessed to have found an amazing teacher there. Um, and he's a proponent of classical Chinese medicine. He's a Taoist priest, and so he kind of brings a lot of the spiritual, or religious side of things from Taoism in there, as well as a very deep understanding of these different meridian systems that represent different philosophies. So Chinese medicine is not really an applied science; it's an applied philosophy. The meridians are the way they are because they have to be there for the philosophy. And so it's a way of evoking change in people by helping them with where they're stuck. If you look at one of the classics, the I Ching, the Book of Changes, it's about understanding the nature of change. And so, I've been fascinated by all of these subjects. I started off with all sorts of things, like role-playing games was sort of the thing that saved my life, really. And from there, interested in stories and psychology, and then from there, art. I did a lot of work with art and exploring who we think we are. And from there, I got into tarot. I got into all sorts of other different healing modalities and applying these healing modalities. So a lot of these things are related to Tweenar anyway. Acupressure I studied before I learned Tweenar, and reflexology is based on Tweenar, but I didn't know it at the time. I know a lot of the kind of the more esoteric stuff with the bioenergy healing and working with Brazilian psychic surgeons and things, that was a bit out there. So I had to really kind of come to something which had a bit more foundation to kind of understand what was really going on with that.
Yeah, I mean, how did you? So this is Jeffrey Yuen would be your main teacher,
Yeah.
right? So how did you find this gentleman? How did that happen?
Oh, it was pure luck. I was sitting in the library in the acupuncture college I was at, cursing the fact that nobody really understood anything. I was asking questions that they all hated. It's like trying to understand energetic anatomy, thoughts and feelings, identity, where all these, and they're all none of them were very interested because TCM is a kind of a way of simplifying everything. So you have a very simplified way of understanding emotions. And if it's anger, it's the liver. If it's sadness, it's the lungs. And it's the sophistication to understand the depths of that I came across a recording of Jeffrey's lecture in the library, and I listened to it, and it was like, oh, thank God, someone who's actually saying why. And he didn't really tell you what to think. He said, this is why these people think that, and this is why those people think that, and this is the criticism these people have of those people. So he gave you the freedom to really use your interest and passion to go deeper into the medicine. And a lot of the criticism people have of studying with Jeffrey is that he doesn't tell you what to do. He doesn't tell you which points to use for particular conditions. And you can't really, because as soon as you do that, you turn Chinese medicine into a population-based treatment. It's like if a person has flank distension, if they have a plumb-stone throats, if they have this, they have liver cheese stagnation. Liver cheese stagnation, you choose level 3, large intestine 4, and that will be how you treat, And it's like we don't really understand the story then. We don't understand why the person is in the state they are, what's created that problem in the first place, why the body behaves the way it does. The body is a very sophisticated way of trying to fight. When it can't fight anymore, it stores. And when it stores, all the symptom pictures changes. So if you're treating people, often what happens is you'll treat someone and you won't know unless you have an understanding of the mechanisms of healing and disease, you won't know if the person's healing from the treatments, and having a catharsis, or whether the person's getting worse and your treatment's aggravated their condition. And understanding that is very useful, particularly when you're looking at a lot of the kind of stuff you're interested in terms of detox, self-help, purifying the body, all of these kinds of things. And sort of the Chinese approach and the strategies of purging can give you a very good insight into what's happening. And especially when you take it too far and you weaken your system, and then you can't purge anymore, and then the disease can penetrate deeper. You can understand what's happened in those systems, and you can work more responsibly and get much greater results and work much faster if you can understand the basic principles of what's happening with the disease processes, where things are stored, how you can approach finding these locations and finding a pathway to draw it out of the body, and understanding the mechanisms that draw it out. You can then use any modality you want. So you could use essential oils, terebinth, black spruce, all these things to find areas of storage to pull things out of the body. You can understand if the person's dry and dehydrated, they're not going to be able to do that because they don't have the fluids to be able to sweat it out, to be able to vomit it out, to be able to pee it out, to be able to poo it out. All of the mechanisms need fluid. They need yang, energy, to be able to force it out, and they need the routes of elimination to be free. If they're not there, then you can detox till the cows come home, but nothing really will happen. Nothing will really work. And at the worst, you'll try to promote detox and you'll weaken the structures of the body. And then what's being held in latency, what's being held in remission, can then penetrate to create an organic disease. So these understandings are very profound and very practical. This is what I try to teach a lot of the students. So, I try to teach to Chinese medicine practitioners, but also to other practitioners with different modalities. Tuina has an amazing understanding of the mechanisms of the body. If you understand Tuina, you understand, like, all needle techniques come from Tuina techniques. If you want to understand how to move things through the body and to push things down, how to regulate, how to work with manual techniques to have very profound effects on the body, and to be able to create very sophisticated healing strategies, Tuina is second to none. It's amazing what you can do with it.
It's like a framework that you can build any other modality on top. I'm hearing.
Yeah, so it's like if, for example, you look at these modalities of the defensive chi of the body, the nutritive chi, and the constitutional chi. So Wei chi, Yin chi, Yuan chi. The defensive chi is responsible for movement and perception. So if you've got a musculoskeletal problem, you can't lift your arm up anymore. You can't raise it. We can identify the channel that's involved with that. It'll be the meridian on the back of the body. So what we do then is we palpate along the back of the body and we find the blockage. When we find the blockage, we can identify the nature of that blockage. Why is the qi stuck in that way? Is there a insufficiency of qi, or is there a surplus of qi? Is there an external pathogenic factor? Say, for example, that you were exposed to a lot of wind and cold. Cold will penetrate into the body and it will go deep and it will create this constricted tightness. So it'll be characterized by fixed, sharp stabbing pain or a kind of tightness. So you try and lift your arm up and it's like it just can't go, or it's just too painful. So there we can use our tweenar techniques. What we want to do is use Nafar technique. What you do is you pinch the skin, you lift it up, and you release it. And what that does is it creates this ascending, so you draw the cold out of the body. So if you can understand these mechanisms and you can palpate and you can find these things, you can actually have a huge impact on almost any condition. And then you're only limited by the resources the patient has. And even then you can support the patient's resources. So then you might use moxa, you burn a herb on the body that generates yang, that gives them support, that then enables you to do tweenar to then work with them. So again, it's with a simple bit of understanding, you can make a huge difference. Like the external anatomy of the body, the defensive qi moves in spirals. So when you want to work with the exterior anatomy, generally speaking, circular techniques are going to be the techniques that you're going to use to move the exterior anatomy. The blood level, the emotional level tends to move in it's contained, so it moves in directions. So when you work with the flow of the channel or against the flow of the channel, you can have an effect on the blood of the body, and therefore you can have an effect on the emotional aspects, the mental emotional aspects of the patients. So very sophisticated way of working.
Okay, that's thanks for clarifying that. So just going back to stage, so you hear this tape recording in the library, and you're like, you finally found your guy. So how did you listen to more of him first, or did you go try and find him? What happened next?
I got bitten by the bug. I tried to find everything I could about him. I tried to find every recording I could. I just started burying myself in it because he was in America. I was a student at the time. I didn't have much resources. I couldn't really go and find him. And then I heard that he was going to be teaching in Ireland, and Ireland was a short distance away. So I went to see him for the first time there. And then every time I had money, I'd try and follow him around. So he was teaching in Italy and teaching in Switzerland and various other places. And then as I started getting more resources, I didn't have much resources. I just spent everything I could getting teachings and following him when I could. And eventually I enrolled, and there was a PhD program he was doing in America. So they did a distance learning version. I enrolled in that. And I just immersed myself. And every time I found a recording, I'd listen to it many times. And it's such dense material that it would take me, 10, 15, 20, 30 times, before I understood it, or at least I understood the depths of it. Each time I'd listen to it, it would be different every time I heard it. I felt like I was asleep, and I hadn't heard it at all. And every time I hear different, and it just unpacked and unpacked and unpacked. And I think that with Chinese medicine, it changes you. I think that if you try to use it to fix your patients, you can sort of do it, but it's not as effective. It has an effect. On you. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you see life. It changes the way that your heart is engaged and orientated. And if you fight it, well, as it changes, all your shit comes up to haunt you. You meet all your own areas where you're resisting change and you're being blocked, and it's incredibly humiliating and humbling.
Is that what happened
So
to you
it's
then?
not for the faint-hearted, but if you do it, I think it's incredibly rewarding.
Is that what happened to you as you learned that you had to go through a process yourself?
Oh yeah, I go through. I think I know it. I think I'm the bee's knees, and then I get humbled hard, and really humiliated hard. So it's I've learned to really become very suspicious of any arrogance or any pride or any kind of sense that I know it. And the more I open up to not knowing, the more the medicine is able to be available to me and my patients. I think that there's something about letting go of certainty is very important, and letting go of the need to be right, and letting go of control. So this is a big part of the work I do with the blood level on the mental emotional side, which then leads to the more esoteric side of things, is being able to listen. So any kind of digestion, any kind of blockage needs to be digested, and the two principles of that would be awareness and relaxation, usually mediated through breathing. And so these become very important principles to work with patients, but also myself. So when I notice that I'm holding my breath, when I notice that I am unable to bring awareness to an area, or I get obsessive by an area, or I notice that I can't relax something, then that becomes something where I realize I'm holding, I'm blocking, I'm needing to be right, I'm trying to be certain. So it gives me opportunities to then come into that heart-centered space. The gateway to the heart is, for me, through the unknown, and through welcoming the unknown, I find insight and revelation comes, which is bizarre. Can't explain it. So the less I try to get it right, the less I try to work it out, the more insight comes with patients, the more insight comes with myself, and the less I have treatment strategies. Even though I talk about strategies and the understanding of disease, when I'm working, it's usually a state of listening, finding areas where someone's stuck, and then asking weird questions like, why are you stuck here? What's going on with this place? What do you think about the world? And hearing the way that they engage with that, you can start getting insights into where they're stuck and where they are unable to welcome the unknown.
Yeah, it sounds very similar. I was just thinking as you were saying that, it sounds very similar to when you're doing qigong. It's if you move fast or with like too much force, the qi doesn't move. Whereas if you move slow, the qi's got more place to move.
Well,
It's
often
kind of
it's like
similar
listening to the
philosophy.
chi and the way your chi naturally moves, and you'll find your natural pace. It might be fast, it might be slow, but it's like where you actually are in that, and eventually it's like the chi is moving you. I mean, I'm not an expert in qigong, so I don't like to talk too much about it. This is all my personal kind of thing. So I don't claim to have any expertise in qigong and that kind of stuff. And your example, but the way I'd relate to it would be, the more you can actually engage with the natural movement within your own body and listen to that, the more you can resonate and harmonize that, the more you can come into alignment with that, the more you come into kind of a situation rather than trying to control everything, which is what we learn and how we lose our innocence. It's like coming back to that open-heartedness of life again. And I think that's kind of what that's for me is something that I can offer patients in finding a heart-centeredness in their life, and in that process there'll be some kind of catharsis, there'll be some kind of digestion that takes place, and they will feel lighter, they will feel more at ease, and they will feel more at peace. And so we tend to associate emotions with the heart, which I say is not necessarily very helpful. I think that thoughts and feelings are both pathology. The heart has its own sort of principles, and acceptance, peace, gratitude, are very profound aspects of a engagement with the life that is signs of very strong heart-centered cultivation.
Kind of touched on it a couple of times now, but what's your? I know we've spoken about it, but what's your kind of thoughts on people doing these trauma therapies and your thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Well, the trauma release therapy and things like this, I mean, the principles are, anything that's stuck is usually stuck deep in the body. So the constitution is usually what gets insulted by trauma, so you can't live your natural life anymore. You get lost in these stories and things. And so vibrational techniques are the ones that use to release the deepest aspects of the body. So you often have like things trauma release therapy where you shake the body, you shake the limbs, and in doing so, things start rising up and start releasing. The question is does the person have the resources to digest? Or if they bring the story of it, or they keep on reinforcing the story by talking and talking and talking and talking about it. If they keep on expressing it, it's not necessarily digestion. It can help them in some ways, but a lot of talking therapies, if you're not careful, can get caught in almost glorifying the story, and you can get even stuck in places. So, my recommendation is to work with the breath. Trouble is, breath work often gets caught with this need for control. So people talk about you need to breathe into the belly, you need to breathe deeply, you need to be to the 8 counts of this. But often people's breath mechanism gets stuck. So when you traumatize, the diaphragm gets locked in order to hold things in. And trying to release the diaphragm is something that's quite tricky because we tend to adapt out by using our abdominal muscles, using the intercostal muscles, using the scaphoid, all the different muscle groups create this very artificial breath. So trying to kind of release things, it's very important to be able to have this free breath. But when you have a free breath, you get naturally you'll have release trauma. When you release trauma, you'll feel overwhelmed probably by things that in the past were too much for you at the time, so you had to store them. And if you didn't store them, you'd have gone crazy. So understanding the mechanism of that is very important, and that's a story of like the low vessels in Chinese medicine and the primary channels both have stories that help you understand the nature of why you would store trauma. And if you didn't store trauma, what would happen? You'd probably have a difficulty in relating to reality and suicidal tendencies and things like this. So being able to release these blockages to the outside, it's often our ambition to fix things is not really coming from a safe place. It's coming from a need to be fixed, a need to be perfect, and again, part of our own psychology of drive and ambition is often something that is not naturally who we are. So learning to know ourselves, learning to come into relationship, and as we do that, we start having more resources, and with more resources we start meeting the traumas, and we start having peace around them. We start being able to accept, I'm an angry person sometimes. So it's not about, so if we have a lot of homicidal rage, it's not about expressing it. We don't express homicidal rage. Bad news. We don't suppress it. We don't repress it. We digest it. So it's like, yeah, wow, homicidal rage, interesting. And we in that digestion, you feel there's going to be some kind of movements through our system. You might see a flushness in the face, a redness, but if we can't do that, we'll have a judgment around it. Oh no, I shouldn't feel that. Yeah, I should. These bastards out there, they deserve it. And the judgment becomes the mechanism of disease. And then eventually, if we can't take responsibility for it, we're projected out onto the world. I'm not a homicidal maniac, but there are people out there are so crazy. The world is so homicidal. It's so bad out there. We make it so that we don't have that. We deny the emotion. So a lot of the ways we kind of comb through these things, trauma, emotional states, is first of all, yeah, that's mine. That's my homicidal rage. And then we'll have a judgment. And I have this fear about it. I feel like I shouldn't have it. But all this time, what we're doing is we're no longer getting identified with it. So it's not like it's all out there. It's not like, it's like I'm a horrible person. I'm homicidal rage. I'm that bad. And it's not about expressing it, we are able to digest it, and in the digestion, it's the body that is the king of digestion. So being able to, this is why I find Tweenar so powerful, body work so powerful, because you can really support people in the digesting process, and you help them digest these experiences that everyone has. Everyone has these, to be a human, you have the full spectrum of these things, but you don't need to express it, suppress it, or repress it. You need to be able to digest it. And that digesting process is quite straightforward. And a lot of the good therapies that you use are going to have these kinds of understandings with them. It's not going to be, yeah, get rid of all your trauma, become a perfect person. It's not going to be trying to force everything out. It's not going to be trying to bury everything or talk about it till the cows come home and never really go through any digesting of it. As soon as the digesting catharsis comes up, we medicate it away. So it's like it's learning how to help that digestive process, and that digestive process you can relate to chronic degenerative diseases too. It's a similar principle. Your body's been storing, and so trying to bring it out, you're going to have some kind of catharsis. So it's like, in the Western tradition, it's like the ancient times. Give me a fever, I'll give you a cure. The body digests things, and it digests things in ways which we in modern times would be kind of very scared about. It's like every time we get a fever, we take paracetamol. But if you have good nursing, good sleep, good exercise, simple exercise with a high sweat, low heart rate, be able to detox through sweating, but not have a cardiovascular system that where you want to a little bit of exercise, but you don't want to torture the body. You don't want to, you don't want to exhaust everything, and you want digestion. You want good digestion. Those three things, good nursing, is going to support almost everyone through healing. And in doing so, that's kind of what I think the West is missing, is good nursing capacity to work through these kinds of catharsises to support people in that healing process. So digestion being half what you eat and half how you eat. We miss so much with just something simple like chew your food properly. It's hard to digest food if you swallow it whole. It's hard to digest food that's raw. Eating raw food and you're ill is not going to be helpful. If you're healthy, your digestion runs like a train. You can digest amazing things out of raw food. If you're taking tons of supplements, supplements are hard to digest. So if you eat the supplement, you have supplements, with ways that support digestion, you're going to get the most out of them. But if you have a whole load of supplements, with superfood, raw food, juices, it's going to be very hard work to transform that, and you can then end up sort of just storing all these things, causing more trouble for yourself. So just simple ideas are very profound when you look at how you can implement them for your own healing modalities.
Because I think when you first said digest to me, I had only ever used that word in terms of eating, but
yeah,
we're talking, and you said it's very straightforward. How would you describe this digestion process that's not the food form? What does that?
Well, if you look
how does it look like?
You could look at it like meditation. Meditation exercises sleep, rest. And so meditation has kind of like, from a medical perspective, has 4 states. So the first stage you look at is relaxation. So when you learn meditation or Tai Chi or Qigong, all those things, the first thing you need to learn is, can you relax your body? If you can't relax your body, how can you digest? You can't, you need to relax to be able to digest. So you train yourself to learn how to relax your body. And this is what Tweenar is very good at, helping you learn to relax your body. But if you keep on torturing yourself with these ideas, or you keep on torturing yourself with the environments being dangerous or difficult, your body protects you and tightens up again. So it's learning the mechanisms that's going on, and can you relax the body? Can you come into that state of relaxation? So you might do body scanning. Might put your awareness in certain areas of your body. You might breathe into areas and tense them up, and then breathe out and relax them. You start trying to get mastery of the relaxation of your body. There's thousands of different meditation styles that work with these kinds of ideas. Once you've mastered relaxation, then you'll master, the next thing is awareness or focus. So if you're Buddhist, you might count your breaths. So you might sit there in a relaxed state, and of course, if you relax too much, you fall asleep. So this is why you meditate sitting up. Usually, you don't usually relax lying down unless you're trying to work with particular techniques for particular specific things. So if you're trying to meditate and you're sitting and you're there now focusing, you might focus on a candle flame. You might focus counting your breaths. You might focus on a mantra, and you notice that when your mind wanders, you bring it back. When you get obsessed, you keep on bringing it back. So if you're counting your breaths, you count up to 7 breaths, maybe. You breathe in, breathe out, count to 1. Breathe in, breathe out, count to 2. Oh, you lost your breath. Oh, come back to 1 again. Breathe in. And when you can do that repeatedly, maybe in some traditions, they say when you can count up to 100 and without losing your counts, you've maintained awareness, focus. And then what happens is you have the third stage would be actual meditation, where in a relaxed state and a focused state, all your shit comes up to haunt you. You'll find the distracting thoughts come up. And when the distracting thoughts come up, you'll kind of chase away and you'll disappear. And then you'll say, I got lost. I'm going to come back. I'm going to practice more focusing again. So you come back to a focusing technique so that you don't get distracted. If you get very obsessive about something and you get really kind of into something and you get lost in the obsession about something, you need to relax more. So you come back to a relaxing technique. So the balance of this paradox between awareness and relaxation is the foundation of almost every aspect of how you come into direct experience of the heart. And so once you've done that, all the stuff you're digesting takes place, and that's what the digestion is. So being able to be relaxed and aware, is very important in any of the healing modalities, and it's not really emphasized very much, and yet by basing including this in your therapeutic treatment strategies and with yourself, it will make all the things that you do have much greater efficacy. The fourth stage of meditation is called levitation. So after you've done this process, you feel lighter. The burdens that you've had, that you have been storing. So in Chinese medicine, you've got the story of healing is like the channel system is divided up into 3 stages. The first stage is how we fight. So something comes in and threatens us, we fight, we get rid of it. We have some kind of catharsis to get rid of it. We sweat, we vomit, we spit, we tears, snots, all that kind of stuff. If you can't heal it, if you can't move it out, if you can't fight, so you can't get rid of it, you will store it now. And that storing process is all these areas the body start filling up, all the spaciousness in yourself fills up. So the body becomes tighter and tighter, more rigid and more decrepit. And the psychology becomes, and thoughts and feelings become more tight. So you become aged. So Jeffrey calls it psychosclerosis. You get a hardening of your attitude. You lose your diplomacy. You lose your fluidity. And you become rigid and old. And then eventually what happens is your body can't keep it at bay anymore, and you get an organic disease and you die. So those 3 stages, you can understand what's happening. That's the story, the progression of the pathology. And if you can understand that, anything that you do that brings awareness and relaxation will start the digesting process. So if it's emotions and pathologies, then you're going to get some kind of thoughts and feelings come up, can you take responsibility for them? If you can take responsibility for them, you'll find you'll judge them, and that judgment will come up. And then you start realizing, oh, that judgment's not me. That's just something that I've been using to keep myself safe, But and so as you let go of the judgment, then the natural movement of the emotion takes place, or the thought takes place, and you'll get some kind of sensation taking place. If it's frustration, then you'll find things will rush up to the head, and you might find you get a red face. Might get a headache. You might get something, and then it'll digest. That'll be the digesting process, and eventually it will go. And then once the backlog of stuff has worked its way through your system, you feel lighter. There's more of you there, and you have more of a sense of possibilities. It's like when you were young, you have a lot of possibilities, and you're old, you feel less and less possible, and and that's aging process. It's artificial. That's the artificial aspect of aging. So Chinese medicine gives you a wonderful insight into how you can free up this pathological process, and how you can let go of the defensive structures you're possessed by. So we kind of look at it in terms of personal satisfaction, moral obligation, and faith. These are the kind of choices you can make, the only choices you can really make. So if you're making choices based on personal satisfaction, it's like, yeah, I want to eat chocolate, all the time, and then screw everyone else who tells me what to do, and then the moral obligation, we're sitting on our shoulder going, oh, you shouldn't eat chocolate every day, it's so bad for you. Think of all this, and all these people who are working in the chocolate fields, and it's all the things, they're not getting any money, and you're getting chocolate. And you end up with this constant internal dialogue that's causing you so much stress, that you can't really live your life very freely. Every choice you make costs you so much. You're like, oh, I don't care about you. I'm eating my chocolate and I fuck you. Or, oh shit, I'm eating chocolate. I'm so bad. Oh yeah. And you do it secretly, and we hide it away. And you can see how we become very rigid and expensive in our day-to-day living. So that process of understanding, choices, and when we align our choices to our heart, when we put something of great importance and reverence, and we make that the thing that we make our choices based on, so then we come into alignment with something of great importance, and we make very efficient choices. It doesn't matter what we put there. Well, it does. We want something of value and virtue, ideally. So in the West, you might put kind of like the teachings of Christ, and we worship that, and we work in that way. Or in Chinese, we might sort of look at kind of how we honor the nature of our elements. So if our element is earth, and we, for us, the most important thing is family, then we put family above all. And we, the idea that we're all in it together. And we live our life from that perspective. And then when we make choices based on personal satisfaction or moral obligation, they're in service of something greater. And then we don't have so much stress in our day-to-day lives. And so that would be how we kind of change the initiation of the generation of the stress. And then the awareness and relaxation would be how we deal with the backlog of stress. And then with Tweenar, I'd then be exploring where you were holding tension, and then I might be asking questions about the nature of what you're holding. If you can, if not, we just work with it until it starts melting and releasing.
I didn't actually realize. I feel like I could talk to you forever. I didn't realize actually what the time was. I don't know how much time you've got, but I do have some more questions. I got one really major one that I'd really like to ask you, but I don't know how much time you got. in general.
What time is it now? I mean, I've got to be on a phone call at 12, so I think I've got time.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yes, it's been an hour already. I don't even know how, but yeah. So
When you talk like this, I could talk like this for days, and I do when I teach.
that's what happens whenever I've had treatment with you. I'm like, oh, it's like we've gone through we've put the whole world on a platter, and by the end of it, so I've got to go now. Go back to work.
Yeah.
The main question was one of the things. I mean, I can never remember because I've tried to relay it a couple of times, but whatever it was is stuck with me, but not enough for me to remember exactly. But we had a conversation. I mean, I got the essence of it, but it was essentially saying how it was basically seeing how we got men's groups and we got women's groups, and they're kind of like doing this healing separately. And it was about how we can then actually come together in our manness, in our womanness, not trying to be wearing dresses and trousers at the same time, but and actually coming together to make something more powerful. Do you remember what that was? Because I don't even know what the whole conversation was.
Well,
But
this is a
that
whole topic
sticks
of
in my head.
conversation that's kind of quite large and relevant in our current society. I mean, you know, it's tricky to kind of give an overview of it, but it's kind of like again, there's some Chinese medicine understanding, there's some other things that sort of coming in it. So I don't want to kind of give the idea that this is kind of classical Chinese medicine. In my understanding of the nature of the dynamic, particularly of mothers and fathers, and the roots of where a lot of these things come from, is um, mothers and fathers have a very big impact in our lives, you know, and the virtues of men and women are slightly different with each other, you know. So again, this is just my understanding. So when you're looking at fathers, often as children, we want our parents to be perfect. We want our parents to be great at what they do. And we often have a frustration and anger that our parents aren't as we want them to be. And the pitfalls that they kind of fall into, the pitfalls that the fathers fall into, is that they lack the courage to come into truth and integrity. And so the masculine journey is about having the courage to face the fears, you know. And so fear is going into the world, fear in saying what needs to be said, in engaging with the feminine and engaging with the world. And when men fail at that, you know, and particularly when fathers fail at that, then we as children judge them, you know, and in judging them, you know, we make a cross for them and a cross for us, and it makes it very difficult for us to find. This can often be a big cause of internal pathology within ourselves. So learning to forgive our parents, you know, forgive our fathers for not having the courage to and not having the courage to protect us, you know, from the aspects of the feminine and the mother. So it's like when mothers are around, mothers need to be able to fail, you know, and so mothers need to be able to stop nourishing and stop nurturing and let their children suffer. And if they can't do that, then they constantly try to support the children, which kind of infantilizes them. And if the father can't intervene, you know, in that process, you know, then we can get caught in this overly nurturing aspect of the feminine. And the virtue of the feminine, you know, is to work with kindness and cooperation. You know, but you know, it's very difficult when there's an incompetent man there and he's not doing his job, and you know, and I need to do it and he's not going to do it, and we start getting the roots of a lot of the fights between men and women, is this kind of this control that takes place, and men tend to bring this control to the world, and they have it they have a difficulty in seeing the internal or the conflicts that involved with the feminine. The feminine can't use physical violence; they tend to use emotional coercion, emotional violence. And if women can't master that, then there'll be a lot of control that takes place. And we come back to controls with this idea in Chinese medicine, where if you're trying to control everything, you're coming out of a heart-centered place and out of a place of faith, and then you're trying to control everything around you. If you can't control everything around you, you get depressed and you collapse. And if you can control everything, you become a tyrant. And so the masculine tyranny, is quite clear when it's there, because it resorts to a physical violence. And so if men don't resort to physical violence, the only option they have, in a situation where there's emotional violence, is to withdraw themselves. And so when they withdraw themselves, they will use their weapon against women, will tend to be using distance. So they will withdraw. What women are looking for love would be attention, and so they withdraw attention. And that will be the way that men fight. Women will tend to use shame, insult, guilt, and reputation destruction. So they will tend to men tend to be evil, and women tend to be crazy. So women will say, he's either incompetent or he's a tyrant. So you ask all these women who their last relationships were. Oh yeah, he was a narcissistic control freak. He was a bully. He was this, he was that. And they will use reputation destruction to sort of destroy the person's reputation, to damage them. And so untangling all of these kinds of difficulties, when everyone's fighting in a war, men and women will create this, it becomes a very entangled story. And so to help men and women understand this, it's understanding the first thing that men need to do is take responsibility, and same with women. And in taking responsibility for the situation, yes, I didn't act courageously in this situation, or yes, I was trying to control this situation. I wanted to be different, and then be engaged with the judgments around that, And so, then I was right in doing that because he's an arsehole, or he's a bad person, or oh God, I'm so terrible. I'm a coward. I'm no man, or and then it's like that's not. You're just getting them to touch with their intrinsic nature rather than the story. Then the digestion can take place, and they can start coming into a relationship from a place which is based on their intrinsic nature, and open up to the unknown, and not need to control the situation. And this is a very beautiful aspect of the masculine and the feminine, and the way relationships are, and how to find your place in society, and how to cultivate virtue, and how to cultivate what is virtuous in your life. There's a lot of opinionated views about these subjects. So I'm a little reluctant to kind of go too much into it, as it's very triggering to a lot of people. But this would be an overview of a particular way you could look at the dynamic between men and women, and bringing that into a healing modality.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there with that. But what?
I like to be open to the unknown. So it's nice to be asked questions which I don't know, and then provide something which comes from a space which isn't to do with thought and feeling, but it's coming from a kind of heart-centered place. And even though there's a slight grip of the anus and a kind of, oh fuck, what am I going to do in this situation, and what am I going to put myself in the shit with this question, as long as I can relate to it and own that, and be with that experience, I don't need to be masterful and courageous in all these things, but I do need to have the courage to meet the experience I'm having. And if I can relate with that, then that becomes this openness and playfulness, and it can become something that is relatable with, rather than a way I need people to believe what I'm saying, or I have no courage to back up what I'm saying. And it's all these different mechanisms play out when we try to control the experience. So, the whole emphasis of the way I work is to honor the unknown, which would be what I put above all, and what I have faith in, which hopefully I can do most of the time, and sometimes I fuck it up, but do what you can.
Would that be like Wu Wei? Is that
You could look at something like that. I mean, I again, with Taoism is a very interesting principle. It's like anything you name that as the Tao is not the Tao. So it's like, you can't really understand it unless you kind of do the experiment yourself and you find it through relating it to yourself. So someone can express it and talk about it, but that's just their experience. So when you start looking at the extreme relative aspects of things, and opening up to the unknown, and then it relates a lot to kind of the mystical aspects of Christianity, to the mystical aspects of Islam and Sufism and things like this. It opens so much of the mystical, and so this would be the water elements, and this is something I have an affinity for, and it's something that I'm exploring at the moment, but it's not necessarily I'm stuck with.
Okay, so you kind of also touched on something else earlier, but I think the conversation went in a different direction. But how long? Firstly, quickly, how long have you been doing Tweenar in its after learning from Jeffrey? About 20 years.
Sorry,
So
how long have I had to, I missed the first bit of the question.
Sorry, can you hear this bloomin' gardener in the background?
I think I'm all right, but
Okay, there's like some chap strimming everything in sight out there, make a right ruckus. But anyway, so just quickly, how long have you been doing Tweenar since learning from Jeffrey?
Probably about 20 years, but I've been doing body work for about 30 years.
Okay.
In terms of Jeffrey, he doesn't necessarily teach Tweenar. It's something that I had to kind of work through myself, really. And in the times I got to ask questions of him, I managed to do it. But it's like, you learn what you can. These days, he's teaching more of Tweenar, which is lovely to see. But yeah, I mean, if it was more direct, you could probably learn a bit quicker. But there's a lot that goes into kind of learning any aspect of Chinese medicine. I think that you can learn the basics fairly quickly. It's when I teach Tweenar, it's like I could teach it on like a 3-day course or a 5-day course to start with to get an overview of the basic principles. But nothing beats practice. And so then going through and working with patients, and then so I mentor quite a few people, and sort of so we go through this process. And then regular work, so at the moment I'm running like weekend workshops where it's not really about a structure or syllabus. It's about being treated and treating. So everyone treating each other and then having space to ask questions. And it goes into all sorts of interesting places. And so we teach about the basics of Tweenar and then from there play. And I think that that's a very profound way of learning. So there's many ways of learning. You can be much more structured with it. When you learn Tweenar at the moment, Tweenar's its only theory is to TCM. So when it's taught, it's mainly taught with TCM, which is a herbalized version of acupuncture, which is applied to Tweenar, which is not so good. But a lot of the the martial arts traditions still have very good connections to Tweenar and working with Tweenar, because they were kept in-house and weren't really to do with medicine. They were much more to do with injuries and accidents and things like this. And you can get some really good Tweenar from experienced martial artists. They're amazing.
Okay, so another thing I noticed, obviously, when a lot of these classics were written, people have always had relationship issues and famines and gout and all sorts of random stuff's happened through history. But what we're exposed to today as a society is way different to anything we at least know of in history, with regards to like all the chemicals and the radiation and these bizarre jobs we all have. Would you say that it's adaptable, but would you say there's like a common thread nowadays of something that's causing ailments, or is that a bit too far reached?
I think that there has been times in history where things like this have been precedented. So like in the 5th century, I think it was in China, there was a surplus of food, and so there was a flourishing of the society, and in that flourishing, people started having jobs in cities, and they started having theatre and sort of art and all these kinds of things, and people stopped having the kind of acute conditions of death, and they start having longer term life, and they started getting more existential angst and anxiety disorders and overwhelm. So people, there are times when Chinese medicine has these kinds of things in terms of the overstimulation that's going on, the chemicals and things like this. We're always adapting. in Chinese medicine, we have something called the curious organs, and so these curious organs are things that are the evolutionary aspect of our life, and so we'll evolve to be able to adapt to these kinds of conditions. It might take generations for it to do, um, but we will do that. And if you want, you can develop treatment strategies where you work directly with the curious organs to support people's in their adaptation processes, to support these things through the generations. In things that you can do for yourself, like you're saying, there's a lot of overexposure to these kinds of things. So chemicals, the environment, there's a lot of yang around. So there's a lot of energy around. We become a bit depleted in yin. Every time there's mobile phone signals, things like this is all very yang in nature. So if you look in cities, there's a buzziness to it. And it can be a little bit difficult to have any space for ourselves, time to develop yin things. But we can cultivate yin. We can go to nature ourselves. We can spend time. We can spend time with ourselves. We can spend time honoring the day and night cycle. And if you see the Yellow Emperor is one of the classics, and Bo is this advisor to the Yellow Emperor, who's a mystical figure in China. But the dialogue between them is in the classics. And the Yellow Emperor says, Bo, tell me, why is it that in ancient times, people used to live to 150, and live good lives? And Bo says, well, in these modern times written about, well, millennia ago, he says, well, people are, they drink too much, they fornicate too much, they live out of balance with nature, so if you want to live a good healthy life, live in touch with nature, rest in the evenings, don't get too caught up with mobile phones, TV and things like this. Do restful things that involve the senses. So listening to music is great, having conversations with people, doing yin things. In the past, people had two sleeps. They'd go to sleep the first time, then they'd wake up and do yin things. So they'd go for walks in the evenings by themselves, or at night by themselves. They'd have conversations. They'd make love. They'd do all these kinds of yin sub things with each other. So live seasonally. Don't have foods that's seasonal. Make sure that you are, having high sweat, low heart rate exercise. Make sure that you are digesting your food, chewing your food properly. Sit down when you eat. Make sure you rest properly. Make sure that when you're doing day-to-day activities, that you are not caught up with the war of personal satisfaction or moral obligation. You have something that you believe in, something you live for, and something you die for. And it may take you time to find what that is. But that journey is important, and this is going to have existential importance in our life. And from there, when you have a surplus, you'll know what to do with your surplus. What to do with the important things in your life, and you start asking the questions of what is meaningful. And this is a big part of how to find a value in the things that you do with your life. And the more responsibility that you take, the more you find meaning unfolds. The more you kind of live a life which is a little bit kind of like put to do with personal satisfaction. Yeah, I just want to be able to live my life and do what I want. I want to fall asleep on a desert island and drinking pina coladas, and you just end up sunburned and drunk. It doesn't really mean much, but having a life that's geared towards we're all in it together, or a life geared towards opening to the mystery of the unknown, a life geared towards finding freedom for yourself, but also allowing freedom for the people that you love in your life, or anyone in your life, having compassion. These become very important things that are hard, but provide tremendous amount of satisfaction and meaning in life, and give you tremendous resources to overcome any of the catharsis and shit that happens when you open the doors to hell when you start healing.
What is you mentioned curious organs? What would that actually be? So I'm curious to know what they are.
The curious organs are kind of the organs that are sort of unchanging, or kind of like or the kind of make us who we are as a human race. So they are they're not unchanging, the ones that evolve. So the brain, It would be one of the curious organs.
Okay.
The uterus would be another curious. But the uterus in Chinese terms means the genitals of both men and women. So the would be the bone marrow, would be the blood vessels. It would be the gallbladder. Strangely, so these are the organs that help us adapt to be humans, and will help us evolve. They're the evolutionary organs. So when you look at kind of animals and humans, these are the things that separate us from the animals, and as a consequence, these are the evolutionary organs. So we can activate them through the primary channels, through the gallbladder meridian, and certain points on the gallbladder meridian that affect those. But you also have the 8 extraordinary vessels. The 8 extraordinary vessels are the deepest aspects of the meridian systems, and how the unfolding of your destiny unfolds, or how your genes unfold. So if you want to sort of work with epigenetics, if you want to work with the things you inherit from your family, you work with these 8 extraordinary vessels, and the kind of the organs of these 8 extraordinary vessels are the curious organs. So they're linked in a very interesting way. So if you want to look at kind of the way your life unfolds, we have the Chongmai, which is the vessel from the top of the head down to the perineum, which is this central axis, which isn't separated, differentiated yet. And when we differentiate that, it comes to the front, which will be the yin aspect of the body, which will be the Renmai, and it will go to the back of the body, which will be the Dumai. So that'll be the resources that we have in our life, and then the blueprints that we engage on with that. So this is how our destiny starts manifesting. And so if you're looking at meditations, the microcosmic orbit, you're looking at how you're bringing the energy up the back of the spine and down the front of the body. You're looking at how you're engaging with the yin and yang as it unfolds. And then you have this girdling vessel around the belly, which is this vessel where when things get overloaded, you can store things there. So in men, our pot bellies, would be how we'd store things. And it consolidates things so that we have we have some spare room, wiggle room, so that our destiny doesn't get knocked off course with anything that happens. We have a kind of thing that stores, and this is then starting to see the idea of this story of healing. So by clearing the daimai, including the girdling vessel, we start releasing the burden on the unfolding of our destiny, and we start having more ease with it. And this becomes a lot of the basic principles of spiritual practices and the more deep aspects of the medicinal practices. And then you have the way that yin and yang unfolds over the cycles of 7 and 8. So this is what we call yin wei mai and yang wei mai. And that represents kind of like at certain stages of our life, our destiny unfolds, and we're quite vulnerable at those stages where we can have insults to our constitution, and we can get kind of arrested development in those kinds of areas. We can get stuck at those kinds of ages and times in our lives. And so we never really got over that time when we were 14 or 16. We never got over that time when we were kind of like 28, 35, whatever it is. And so we can use these vessels to support the kind of the release of the obstructions of things there. And then you've got the Chow vessels, which is like the stance you have right now. Do you have the wisdom right now to engage with life in a way that is congruent with virtue and importance? Or do you have the wisdom to know yourself and understand yourself? So these become the kind of the very deep vessels that you can use to make quite big transformations in your life. But again, it's an invitation to do that. So if you want to create a ritual where you're saying, I want to have a greater understanding of myself right now, so you can use the Yin Chow Mai vessel. And when you get a treatment from a practitioner, it's going to have much greater efficacy. But if the practitioner just tries to open that vessel without your cooperation or engagement with that, or it's like you're fighting yourself there. If they don't understand why you are holding that back, so then we want to create a story as to, well, where did this come from? I came when I was 6. Okay, it came from this traumatic event I had in this situation. Okay, well, maybe the other channels involved here. We need to honor the origin of this. And where is it now? Well, now it's holding my diaphragm. I'm locking my diaphragm. I'm bracing myself. Okay, we need to honor that. We need to work with the diaphragm where it is. And where is it threatening to go? Well, we want to strengthen where it's threatening to go, so we can uproot this story of disease and enable change in your life. And that would be a strategy for treatment. So that's what would be a way we could look at what Chinese medicine is trying to achieve.
So yeah, you mentioned a while back about the the diaphragm being locked, and that it's quite hard
Yeah.
if you were to say, "Oh, just go breathe," but if it's locked, what have you got any like specific techniques? Or would it be like we discussed a minute ago, where have that reflection and internal trying to relax it through feeling it, or is there a specific
There's
way?
like in Chinese medicine, there's tons of specific things. So what I like to do is there's a breathing technique where what you do is um, you hold the breath, and when you hold the breath in or out, say in, you take a breath in, you hold the breath. What you do is you move the breath from the chest to the belly, and then you bring it from the belly to the chest, and you bring it from the chest to the belly, and you engage with that. And what you're trying to do is get the diaphragm to start moving. So if you try to lock thoughts and feelings in, you'll lock the diaphragm, you'll lock the sternocleidomastoid, and you'll lock the jaw. So these become the major locks that you have to hold everything in. So to instigate that release, but trying to do that consciously can be very difficult because the structures that are trying to keep us safe are usually unconscious. They're usually we're usually not identified with them anymore. And so it can almost become like a little bit of a war until we can kind of prove to our defensive structures that we're capable adults and able to take responsibility for the experiences we have, and so the catharsis that can take place. Often our psychology will not let us go into these areas. So that's an entire thing in itself. We can honor it with acupuncture. There's acupuncture points that will try and open up the diaphragm. But again, you might find that it starts releasing, and then you start getting panic, and all these emotions coming up, which is too much, and you lock it down again. And the process of opening that up, if you do it yourself, you may have these experiences. And if you're doing it yourself, you may have already adapted your breathing so much that you when you actually move the breath from the chest to the belly, what you're doing is you're pushing and straining the abdominal muscles. The abdominal muscles are tightening up, and you're trying to push into them, and you get this conflicting movement, which is not really the diaphragm releasing, or the diaphragm is being inhibited by your own internal obstructions. So the breath is, in terms of simple exercises, yeah, but there's complexities due to how adapted you are. And so it's nothing to be ashamed of if you can't move the breath that way. It's just giving you clues as to how adapted you are and what's actually needed in order to start open these things up.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah. So going off on a bit of a tangent, I know if you don't want to talk about it, let me know. But I think you've mentioned it to me before, but I think the people would. It's quite an interesting character you met in Brazil. Rubens Farias, is it?
Rubens Farias Jr.
So how did you meet him? What was he all about? Because this is something I don't think many people would have ever thought as a thing. I just think it's an interesting story to share to the people. Because how did you end up in that? I mean, who was he?
I was lost looking for something to study, and I think I came across him from my dad. I think my dad recommended I go to this workshop, and I went to this workshop, and there was this strange guy, and he had all these magical powers, and and he was, I thought, this is it, this is amazing, I'm going to find this. I was young and naive, and so I kind of tried to study, with what he was doing, and he said it was a Brazilian faith healer, and I thought, a load of bullshit, really. But he's doing interesting things, and he's doing all sorts of interesting. I'm interested, and I was interested in understanding energy and how to move energy and things like this. And he was doing these strange demonstrations where he was kind of like getting people to kind of bend arms and doing sort of basically kinesiology and things like this. And then I was doing a workshop in Italy, and he said, "Oh yeah, we need to do some surgery on this woman." And I was thinking, wow, a load of rubbish. He's going to palm chicken giblets in his hand, and he's going to put his hands through the belly, and he's going to kind of go, "Oh, look at this! I've pulled this out of the body and thrown it in a bloody bucket," and that kind of stuff. And then he was there was this woman who had a lump in her leg, so she got her to pull her trousers down and lie on the couch, and he started laying surgical instruments on her belly. And he sliced open her leg, a wound about that big, and he got her to pull the wound open. And a kid was running around. There was no blood. There was no anesthetic. There was no pain. And he got a pair of scissors, and he went in and he chopped out a fatty cyst, and it was about that big. And he put it in a glass jar, and he gave it to her, and he stitched her leg back up. And and there wasn't any bleeding, and there was no pain, there was no antibiotics, there was no, and as we saw the wound, it was about that big, and after a week, it was about that big, and there was no redness around it. It was a very clean wound. And he was saying, of course, there'll be no scar. And she said, but I want a scar. I said, okay, you can have a scar. And I've got a photo of me bright green, looking at it, saying, you shouldn't be able to do this. And it was just a strange experience. And he did surgery on some Italian surgeons who wanted to know about how to do pain-free surgery, and he sort of sliced open the guy's back, over his sacrum, and he got the forceps opening the wound, and these surgeons leaning over his shoulders, looking at what he's doing. And the guy's drinking a cup of espresso, with no pain, with major surgery sort of taking place. So he was an amazing guy. He was just incredibly unreliable, so he'd have hundreds of people coming to see him, and he'd do these healings. He couldn't really do sort of that kind of surgery in England because he was afraid of getting arrested for assault. I called up the Crown Prosecution Service and asked them would they arrest him if he did something like that, and they said, well, we'd have to see if there's a complaint. So we couldn't really do anything like that. But he was just a bit crazy. It's like I'd have hundreds of thousands of people looking to come and see him, and he'd give me his 6 month schedule 6 months out of date. So it was just really unreliable. He'd say, you've got cancer. Come and see me 3 times, and they couldn't. So that very, very difficult. For a lot of people, and he caused a lot of mayhem. And so, it was because of him. And I studied with him for a couple of years, but he couldn't really teach what he was doing. I don't think he really knew what he was doing. He was talking about connecting to love and things like this, but no one could really do the same kind of things he was doing. He was kind of channeling entities and things like this. And he was, yeah, but it's not something I was so interested in. I'm much more interested in kind of like the internal mechanism. I'm also interested in the supernatural side of things. I was astounded by his surgery and things like this. And I saw kind of, the effects of his surgery from a few people, and yeah, it's just absolutely remarkable. But in the end, I wanted to learn something which is a bit more energetic anatomy, which was something that I could actually learn and come to grips with. And he's what really inspired me to come into Chinese medicine. So I'm grateful for the experience. But at the same time, I think he's an astounding healer, but I don't think he was very good at teaching other people healing. No, but the invitation was there to be open-hearted. But I think back then I didn't really have the courage to really kind of meet my heart, and I'm not really inspired to challenge patients by slicing them open with surgical instruments. Things like this. I don't know how he managed to do it. It's a strange guy.
So what are you up to now? What's on Tim's plans for the future? How can people get in contact with you? Are you doing any courses, this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm teaching all over the place. I'm going to be going to New Mexico and Vancouver in July. I'm going to be going to Australia in October. I'm teaching in Prague. I'm teaching different places. I don't have a website. I have a website, but it's 10 years out of date.
So how can people who've listened to this be like, I need to go see that Tim guy? How can they do that if you don't have a website?
Well, they do have a website. It's just out of date.
You're as bad as the blooming psychic surgeon.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I'm learning from him. I didn't put it together.
Have you got
I'm so angry with him.
Have you got email or something, or if you don't want to share that or
I've
something?
got email address. You can email me. You can text me. WhatsApp or whatever. I have a private practice in Totnes, so I see patients in Totnes on Tuesdays to Thursdays. I do phone consultations with people. So on Mondays and Fridays, I do phone sessions with people. So I do mentoring, so supporting people in this work without the body work, and also supporting students in terms of if they want to understand Chinese medicine more or understand the classical approach more. And then I teach on Friday evenings. Not every evening. I do something called the Kitchen Table University, where people come over and we drink Chinese tea and talk about Chinese medicine. And then if people want to kind of have classes, they call me and we see if we can come to arrangements, and they get 12 people together and I come along and teach Chinese medicine that way. Or I'm running weekend classes. So like I said before, where you can come along to be treated and to treat and learn about Chinese medicine that way. And so you'll learn the basics of Tuinar, and any questions you have, we can kind of go through. And we have questions and treatments, which is a lovely way to. What it really is teaching how to come into the heart and treat from the heart. So it's not really needed. You don't need any Chinese medicine background or classical Chinese medicine background. I have patients there just come along to be treated, but also to get an idea of what's going on for themselves. So there are lots of different things, and so just send me an email, and if you're interested, or send me a WhatsApp or something like that.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Because I wanted to make sure people could get some learning from you if they're interested. And lastly, if you had to give a message to the world, if there was like one thing you wish you could impart to, if everyone in the world was listening to this hypothetically, what would be the one thing you wish to impart?
I'd be horrified by the idea. I think, who am I to know what's right for everyone? I would say the heart is a very beautiful place to explore. I would say I come out of my heart when I try to control other people's lives, or where I don't have the courage to be myself. So I would say have the courage to be yourself and don't try to control other people.
Wise words. Well, I will.
Whatever they are, wherever they come from.
It's good to see you again, my friend. I think.
Lovely to see you too, Diesel.
I'll be back on home soil at some point. I'm not sure when that's going to be, but I will come and see you when I'm in the vicinity for sure.
You're most welcome.
And I'll put all the links that you're willing to share in the description and stuff, and hopefully, people get to learn all the wisdom you have.
Well, there's plenty of wisdom out there, not just in Chinese medicine, but it's amazing. The world is an amazing place. Have fun exploring it.
All right. Peace out.
Take care, Giselle.
Bye.
And what's your intention with this podcast?
The intention with this podcast is to inspire. I've got loads of interesting people coming here talking all health and things that can upgrade humanity.
Crystalline Podcast.
Plus, I get to learn stuff, which is pretty handy. I get to just ask questions that take me a while to go and research. I can just ask them when I speak to them. So that's kind of cool. I don't know. It's just kind of fun. I just enjoy talking about this stuff.